Hey everybody. Today we're going to be talking about a specific Skaven unit, in this case, the Brood Horrors. The Brood Horrors are kind of an interesting little topic. Ever since Twist in the Twilight DLC, they came out. At first they were very, very overpowered, and then they got nerfed down, and now a lot of Skaven players don't like them. Why is this? That's what we're going to investigate today. Brood Horrors don't look bad on paper. They have a weird thing called Death Blow, meaning on their way out the door they will swing one more time. That's more neat than really helpful, but fine, that's fine. They do have ITP because I don't know why they need the ITP trait, and that's kind of the overall thing with Brood Horrors in general. They do get ITP from Frenzy. They don't need it because of Terror and Fear. They have Fire Weakness. They're a Molder Monster, meaning they get affected by certain buffs and weaknesses, but they do have Regeneration, which gives them weakness to fire, which we can cover in a little bit. Otherwise, they look okay. Poison attacks, weapon strength is high, armor piercing. They have a ridiculously high speed at 95 for a monster. That's pretty neat. Their low leadership is a big problem for them. Otherwise, they seem okay. Now, we're going to have them fight exactly what they probably should fight. Stegodons. Stegodons are only 100 gold less, and 4830 compared to 3032. They do have armor piercing, but most of their stuff is anti-infantry, and the Brood Horrors are largely unarmored. So you would think this is the exact fight the Brood Horrors want to take. Then why do they usually lose it, and why do Skaven players kind of hate them? Well, that's what we're covering here. So as we watch this, Death Messenger is just going to go fight the Red Crested Skink Chief just to keep him off. You can see already we're taking a large amount of damage. Also, Stegodons have twice our health pool, which is a big problem. You can see on the far side, Brood Horror suffers from some really janky animations there where he got knocked back and then he ran sideways for a bit. That's pretty bad. Like this whole thing that's going on down here. That's worthless time and gives your enemy another attack. Now we see here, this Brood Horror also has an attack order on that Stegodon and gets another attack order, but it largely ignores it and just goes after the Stegodon anyway. This unreliable nature of Brood Horrors is a big problem, and their propensity to rout, while other monsters don't rout, is another big issue with them. They largely just struggle, and I am going to fast forward through the rest of this because it's just a little bit of bumping. Bump, 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 bump. And they lose and run away. Yada yada. Game ends. So if you look at the values of the things that we're fighting, 600, 650 versus 650 and 2,100. So the Stegodons did outperform them, but it happened really quickly, so I'm going to go back in there. But this is one thing about Brood Horrors and the Dread Saurian. The Dread Saurian's the other unit I've noticed it on. But units that disobey orders or don't do exactly what you want them to do feel really bad, in my opinion. So you see, he has an attack order on the Stegodon this whole time, and yet he runs over here and attacks this other one. He still has an attack order on this one, but he's just ignoring it and going after this Stegodon. That's really weird and really annoying. So imagine if you're in a game where you're trying to chase down a Lord, right, and he's running through Spearmen. If you're giving your Brood Horror a million attack orders to chase that Lord and get out of the Spearman, there's about a 50-50 chance whether or not he's just going to ignore you and keep fighting the Spearman no matter how many times you click him out of there, leading to a dead unit. So that feels bad. People don't really like unresponsive units. People don't really like things with overly flashy attack animations that get them more hurt than it's worth. So that's already a pretty damning review of the Brood Horror. But it doesn't get any better. Brood Horrors are 1,200 gold. If you're trying to compare what you can get on that roster, are you going to get more use out of a Brood Horror or out of 4 Clan Rats? Or a Clan Rat and a Jezzail? Probably a Clan Rat and Jezzail going to get more. You could get Ikat Zap Zap for that cost, right? Could get Rat Ogres and Clan Rat with Spears. They cost almost as much as Deathmaster Snitch. But you're never going to get that much value out of them. Not as much as him anyway. So on their own roster, they are comparatively nice. But the other big problem with Brood Horrors is that they're weak to fire damage. They're weak to fire damage, and they have low armor, meaning basic missiles can do a lot of damage to them. Fire does a lot of damage to them, which there's a prevalence of fire melee attacks, fire spells, a spell that gives you fire melee attacks. Brood Horrors in general are just really weak. And if we look at that, who was I? Chaos. Chaos Horse, Lord of Fire. Put you on a horsey. Everything else is fine. I don't give a shit. And then Scavino. Throt. Brood Horror. Good for you. So Fireball is a very cheap, very easy spell to take. Not a spell that requires a lot of skill to use. Need more mana. There we go. Overcast one of those bad boys. Boop. And 5,000 health Lord. Oh. Does almost 1,000 damage to him. Gives me 400 value off of one spell that I can spam through the whole entire game. Also, Throt's leadership is abysmal. Most Brood Horror's leadership is abysmal. So that's a big problem. Brood Horrors lose to cavalry, they lose to monstrous infantry, they lose to spear infantry, and they lose to basic missile fire and skirmish cav. So the thing about Brood Horrors that's weird is they don't really have a target. They don't really have something they're good at fighting, right? Because they kind of lose other monstrous duels, usually. They're one of the cheaper single entity monsters in the game, and the only other things underneath them they lose to in most situations. Things above them they lose to because that thing's more expensive. They don't have anti-large, they don't have anti-infantry, they don't have good splash damage, they can't clear... I'll grab the Warlord. They can't clear basic infantry worth a damn. So Brood Horrors just kind of don't do anything. And that's their biggest issue. Now some people point to, well, they're fast and they regen, they have terror. That's cool, but you're paying 1,200 gold for a fast terror piece to just run around and be there. In very few matchups is that useful. And hit him. Now they do have good mass, as you can see. Chieftain can run through however he wants. It's taking him a really long time to even clear out a basic Chaos Marauder. I mean, I am playing this on fast forward, and we're about a minute into this combat, and he's got him down to half health. They've got him down to a quarter. Still using his abilities, chasing around my Fire Sorcerer. Fighting. Still fighting. Which is fine. Like, oh, you took a monster duelist and put him in combat with a bunch of basic infantry. Well, that was dumb of you, and it's like, yeah, but he's not that good of a monster duelist either. Doesn't really have anywhere to go. So Brood Horrors just aren't that good. You run around, but you run around to where? To what end? What are you trying to achieve? Would be my point. And the final thing I'll say about them... Oh, why that happened is his melee defense isn't that incredible. Actually, basic Brood Horrors are even worse. Only 30 melee defense, but then no armor to compensate. Whereas if you look at Lizardmen... You have a dinosaur for me to look at? Sure, Blessed Stegodon. Melee defense of 33, but an armor of 110 makes that a very different situation. What was the last thing? Oh, yeah. Their unit cards are fucked up. Brood Horrors, I don't know if something changed, but I think they maybe used to have anti-large. Now they don't. They don't have anti-large in any form. Yet their unit card says anti-large. Throt, another thing with the Brood Horror. Throt on foot, anti-large. What a good boy. Has anti-large. He literally is meant to fight giant monsters and gave them to his will. Brood Horror loses it. He loses his anti-large on his Brood Horror. Just becomes more snipeable and very expensive. This Brood Horror also doesn't have anti-large. So, it's pretty weird. Also, Brood Horrors are wildly inconsistent. Throt on his Brood Horror has 45 armor. Brood Horror has 40. Okay. Then Chieftain on his has 60. So, what are we doing here? It's just weird. They're weirdly inconsistent. What is he? 48, 45? Warlord on his, 48, 40. So, like, all the Brood Horrors have different stats for some reason, which is a little odd. And they don't make up for it with anything. They're just kind of fast and limp, I guess. So bad animations, no real specific use. Weak in monster duels, weak at chaff clearing. The only things that are good is their mobility and ability to run around. Now, are they hopeless? No. I have 2 matchups I can think that I take them. Norska, they're good. And Tomb Kings, they're good. More specifically, Throt on a Brood Horror, not the Brood Horrors themselves. In both those matchups, it's just kind of... The speed can actually be helpful, especially with like Cetra Chariot builds running around. Throt does okay, though they do imbue fire damage, so you have to be careful with them. And Norska, they're a low leadership faction, so it actually can be nice to bully them around. But yeah, no, Brood Horrors just unfortunately suck. They're too expensive or too weak, either or, but you either need to buff their stats, give them anti-large or like a weird explosion kind of effect, kind of like the Jabber Scythe has. I don't know. They just need something right now because they suck. Maybe like downgrade them to 1,000 gold. They'd be a little more worth it, but 1,200. And the only monster I can find that they beat is the Feral Bastillodon, which is 650 gold. And even then, it gets an even trade. Like, it'll take your Brood Horror to about half health. So that's tedious. That's if you're fighting without infantry support. Other than that, they can just spam fireballs and kill it. Or bring Thorax and one-shot it. Or basic cavalry and kill it. Yeah, they suck. Brood Horrors suck.